Catus, Maximus here, this time with a quick review of the Carnage tool Anemometer, which is a wind speed meter. Carnage Tools did send this to me, thank you. They are kind of like Ulsa, where except for they sell stuff for a little bit cheaper. There's a lot of companies that are popping up, tool and equipment companies, and what they're finding an edge on is the fact that when you order stuff from overseas, one, it's a lot cheaper, but two, it can take anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. So a lot of these companies are really just, their edge is ordering stuff, getting it in stateside or even in the European Union where it's more local. That way they can ship it out and you can have it in a week and they charge a small markup. Anybody who has a sufficient savings can do that. You can order a bunch of products, warehouse them locally, and then resell them. And that's what Carnage Tools seems to be doing, because they just applied a sticker to this. They didn't even, pay the extra to actually have their name screen printed onto the tool. But it's still pretty neat, especially for $38 when it's actually a reasonable wind speed meter. Now, as far as its specifications are concerned, they're actually not too bad. And there, we'll just flash through that. In miles an hour, or excuse me, I should say in kilometers an hour, it'll read up to 108. What's interesting is it has two ranges. It has a range where it is certified to be accurate, but it can read quite a bit higher than that, but they say for reference only. So what it must mean is that there's a finite amount of processing power in here. So when the fan is spinning too fast, it's not catching every single blip. All this is an impeller. An impeller is a propeller, except for the fluid is making the fan spin, so the fan spinning, making a fluid move. So that's why this is called an impeller. And it may just be skipping. What we have in there is, if we can just see there, let me get a flashlight. It seems in half my videos I need a flashlight. Someday they'll make a camera that actually has a respectable amount of dynamic range. There are holes in that fan, and they're actually just supported by needle point bearings on each side. And a light shines through those holes, and it just counts how fast the light's blinking on and off. So at above 108 kilometers or 67 miles an hour, it isn't able to read every bump, but it can read some of them and is able to determine that it's moving a lot faster than its max speed, but it isn't certified. Anyway, it is indeed an optically based system, so it is pretty reliable. I should say one thing about Carnage Tools is this is the only model they're selling, which is the base model. However, the box is for both the base model and one that has temperature and humidity. But Carnage doesn't sell the one with temperature and humidity, and actually it would have been right here. The one with temperature and humidity also has a USB port, which this one doesn't have. So Carnage, you may want to sell the upgraded model in addition to this one, or maybe just replace this one, because temperature and humidity is important because it allows you to calculate the actual density of the air that's moving through. So you can say that I have a 10-mile-an-hour wind. You can say that it's coming out of a specific vent, and which is kind of interesting about this is it has a function to where you can set the area. And what that allows you to do is they use this to measure cubic feet a minute. You say you set the area of 1 cubic foot of area, that would be the size of the vent. Then you put this in front of the vent, and it'll be able to calculate cubic feet a minute. That's a volume, but that is not the mass of the air. We know about mass airflow sensors. They're using automobile engines because they need to know more than just how fast the air is going through or how many cubic feet. It needs to know the exact weight, how many air molecules are actually passing through, and you need to take into account temperature and humidity for those calculations. So that's what I would recommend for them. And this would be for high speeds. There are ones like this Alnor. This is for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And so this is what an HVAC technician might use to put in front of vents when they're setting up an HVAC system. Or somebody may say, on one side of the lunchroom it's super hot, and on this side it's super cold, and they'd be able to tell that one vent is pushing a whole lot more air than another one. They have to do some modifications. So this is what a really low speed and particularly high accuracy anemometer would look like. These are obviously for much faster applications. It does have a backlight, which is actually pretty decent in this situation where it's evenly lit and pretty bright. It does not remember your settings. That's probably one of the biggest criticisms. So every time you turn it on, if you want to use miles an hour, you got to hit the unit button. but I suppose that's okay. It does use a 9-volt battery, and I would have preferred maybe it used 3 or 4 AAAs or something like that, because 9 volts are just a little bit cumbersome and they're a bit overpriced for batteries. It's easier to design electronics to work on 9 volts though, because it's just a higher voltage, and so it's easier to deal with. And we'll just put it in front of this little fan. I originally got this because I kind of thought it would be neat to see how well my little DJI Mavic Mini performs in particular wind speeds, but it's only at the altitude that you can hold it at, so that'd be at ground level. But that's all you do is you hold it up to the wind. You want to make sure you tilt it around to make sure you get just the right angle so you're getting it correctly. One nice thing about these is that they will work in either direction, so you can either have it face this way or you can have it face reverse. The little light sensor just counts the pulses. It doesn't care which way the impeller is actually spinning. And that's all it really is. All right, you wanted to see how... Here we go, just for a little outside look. Kind of hard to see. The wind's coming from the direction of the sun. That's all you do with these, is just face them into the wind, maybe turn a little bit so you can get just the right angle, so you can get just the right amount of flow. And that's all you really are doing with these, is just getting an idea of the actual real world wind speed. Go ahead and see how what kind of velocities we can get out of this thing. Let's turn this on. This will be loud. As you could see, we got it to hit 65 miles an hour right near the port of that fan. And that's actually pretty fast wind. Try standing on top of a car going highway speeds. Pretty serious wind velocity. So 65 miles an hour, and that's what it says, 67 max and up to 90 for reference, but it'll read up that high. There's going to be some pretty strong winds. I mean, you could be out in hurricane force winds and actually say, wow, you know, look, I'm sitting in 60 plus miles an hour. And so that's the other reason I kind of like this unit. Lastly, units like these, you want them big. There's many like little ones where they're for hiking and stuff that have just tiny little impellers. The problem is they just have such a tiny surface area to act upon. This has a much larger surface area to act upon, so it can read pretty darn low, 1 mile an hour. And secondly, it's interacting with a larger section of air, so it's going to give you a little bit more accuracy that way, just because it's a larger body that it's measuring rather than like some tiny little pinhole. But for 38 bucks, it's about the average price for these, and this little digital one actually seems pretty decent, and so might as well get it from Carnage Tools versus Alibaba, because then if you have a problem with it, it's much easier to deal with just getting a swap or something like that. It does once again come in this nice little bag and a halfway decent instruction manual. The one other criticism here is it tells you to calibrate it once a year right here, but nowhere in this manual does it tell you how to recalibrate it, which could be handy. These types of things never really go too far out of calibration, but I thought that was amusing in the manual. And it does indeed have a nice little overmold there. So overall, I think it's a pretty cool little unit, and just wanted to show it to you all. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching. Oh, I should mention one last thing. Because this is an impeller for a wind speed, the fan is actually designed kind of odd. The blades are flat and they're totally square tipped. And I thought that was a little bit interesting too, being an impeller, that the blade design is much different than, say, a normal computer fan. The last thing to note is if you're not going to use one of these for a while, you would want to pull out the battery, because it does have a software button. The problem with the software button is it's always drawing a little bit of power from the battery to check to see if you're actually pressing the power button versus having a mechanical switch. I always prefer mechanical switches because they physically cut off the connection to the battery. And so if you're not planning on using it, you're going to end up having to pull out the battery. And the battery fits in really tight. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.